Whenever I share one of my Death Guard models online, the first question I usually get asked is, what paints did you use? Well, I couldn't be more excited to finally share a look at how I paint my Heresy era scheme. I started with this recipe a few years ago when I bought the Betrayal of Cult box to kickstart my Death Guard force. I wrestled around with a few tests trying to really nail that bone look to the whites. It really started to come to life when I came across some of the Grim Dark Compendium's earlier videos, and I learned the secret of AK Interactive Streak and Grime. Since then, Games Workshop has released a bunch of amazing 40k Death Guard models, and not only has my army grown, but so has my scheme. While the scheme has been updated, the base part of the recipe has stayed the same since that first Marine. I'm going to walk you through how I get these base layers going, as well as looking at chipping and weathering, just in time for you to kick off your own Death Guard force with the new Horus Heresy release. Let's get started. First up, give the entire model a coating of black primer. Once you have that set and dried, go over it with a white ink. I tend to find that the white ink sprays better than most white acrylics I've used. By using the white ink, I give the model a quick zenithal pass. Whenever I can, I try to subassemble my model for painting. In this case, ideally trying to keep bits that will be green separate from bits that will be won't. If you can't easily subassemble, I highly recommend Silly Putty. It's a great tool for masking off base layers while using an airbrush. The paints I'll be using at this stage are Terminata Stone from Games Workshop, Deathworld Forest by Games Workshop, Dollar Roundy White Ink, and Dead Flesh by Vallejo. And a little flow improver helps whenever I'm airbrushing. The first stage is using Terminata Stone and giving the model an all-over coat. When doing this pass, give it just a few thin layers and build it up gradually. It's okay if it doesn't fully cover in some of the darker areas, this will just help really add depth to the shadows later on. But it's entirely up to your own personal taste and how strong you want to go with this pass. Next, we'll use a 1-to-1 mixture of Terminata Stone and Dollar Roundy White Ink. When spraying at the stage, try to focus on where you want your light source to be. For this example, I'm focusing my light source from the top down. Try to go really light with the stage, giving a few passes and slowly building it up. You also want to match the light angle with any other pieces that you have subassembled, like the power pack. Once all the bone is complete, it's time to move on to the greens. I use Deathworld Forest for the base layers of the shoulder pads and the helmet. Like the bone pass, try to keep it light on the darker areas of the primer to help build up your shadows later. We'll also be highlighting this base layer with the 1-to-1 mix of Deathworld Forest and Dead Flesh. Again, try to keep your overall light source in mind here, keeping those brighter passes at the angles where the light will hit. Once the bone and green colors are down, I do a pass of satin varnish to lock in the base layers. This is completely optional, but it gives me a peace of mind to protect those thin airbrush passes. Now it's on to chipping. We're going to use Dryad Bark for this pass, but really any dark brown will work here. I just find that it has really good coverage. There are two methods to this approach, and I use them pretty interchangeably. The first is just using a brush. Any brush will work. I tend to use it when I want to put thinner lines on top of panels or creating bigger cracks in the surface. The other method is using a small bit of foam. I like to use a pair of tweezers to hold the foam. I find it easier to manipulate around without pressing too hard. Using foam is great for getting little fine chips in the armor, and you can get some bigger chunks depending on how much you press the foam onto the kit and how much paint is on the foam. This all comes down to personal preference. You can go heavy or as light as you want at this stage. I usually jump back and forth between brush and foam. I find doing a brush pass at the end is a great way to clean up the foam pass, increasing the size of chips or going around corners that the foam just didn't hit. Once the pass of brown is complete, it's time to add a bit more depth to our chips. You want to go with a lighter color that is in line with your base color. So for example, on the bone parts of the armor, I use a straight white for the stage. This will help give the chip a bit more depth. You want to focus at the bottom of your light source for this step. Since I focus my base coat highlight top down, I'm going to focus all my chip highlights at the bottom of the chip, where the light would catch. If you go too heavy with these highlights, don't worry, you can always go back with straight brown and tidy them up later. I do a similar pass on all the green armor pieces using dead flesh to highlight. Same treatment and process as the white armor panels. I follow up with a pass of Balthazar gold on any of the trim or areas of the kit that would be gold. Now that the chipping stage is set, I glue on most of the pieces to the kit, in this case the shoulders and the head, and give an all-over pass of satin varnish. I do this to not only lock in and protect all the base work that we've done, but to give a good protective coat before we weather the model, so the grinding stage doesn't stain the original coat too much. Now it's time to add that grimy flavor to the Plague Marine. As I mentioned earlier, AK Interactive Streak and Grime is the magic here. I've seen streak and grime applied by both brush and airbrush in other videos, but I've always just used a brush, even on the larger kits. There's no real reason why, I guess I just tried to avoid having to clean enamel paint out of my airbrush. You can use oil paints at this stage, but I still use streak and grime just to maintain the look of my overall force. You'll do a quick pass all over the model, making sure to cover every area and in all the little recesses. I tend to let this sit anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. It really depends if I'm doing a few models at once or not. Just wait for it to dry up and it'll look something similar to this when it's ready. Over the years, I've used a few different ways of removing the grime, but I find the trusty Q-tip is too hard to pass up. You're also going to need some white spirits or mineral spirits to reactivate the grime. You'll want to gently dab your Q-tip into the spirits and then dab it onto the model. Then I'll flip the Q-tip over to the dry section and start to brush away the paint. Try to think of where the dirt and grime would collect, like the recesses or different sections of the helmet, dragging the excess paint into those areas to build up. You'll repeat this process all over the model using the same technique. I try to focus on one section at a time while doing this stage. When you get to some of the flatter areas, try to pull down. This will help create some of that streaking effect. I tend to focus on areas where there's chips, so it'll look like rust streaks. You can also go back with your brush and add a little more streaking grime to enhance the streaks, add new ones, or just simply add grime if you've accidentally taken off too much. You can go as heavy or as light as you want at this stage, depending on how you want your model to look. I like to switch to the pointed Q-tip here, as it helps kind of focus and define the shape of the streak. And after you remove the streak and grime, here's how it can look. Once the griming stage is set, I tend to go back to punch up the greens just a bit. I've used Wave Watcher Green Glaze from Games Workshop at this stage, but any of the new contrast paints can work just as well. I just give a thin layer over any of the green panels to kind of punch up the color. And that's it. You've got an awesome looking Death Guard model ready for the battlefield. Here's a look at the fully finished model. I've used some Vallejo texture paint on the base. I've used a mixture of different dark weathering powders to add a little texture to the base, as well as adding a little dust effect to this feat. For rust, I have a few different techniques. Depending on the model, I use some weathering powders or various acrylics to achieve an effect. If you'd like me to do another video on the rust effects, just let me know in the comments. Here's a full list of paints I've used for the finished model. I really hope that you found this tutorial useful. If so, throw it a like, sub, and I'll try to make some more. If you do use this scheme, hit me up on social media and share your finished model. I'd love to see how it turned out. Thanks for watching.